Welcome. Well, Kathy, what do you think? Should we start? All right. Will you start the recording?
I did.
Oh, it's already recording. Yeah.
Yeah, did you get a
I see it.
message that we're recording? Good.
Yeah. I didn't get the message, but I see in the upper left corner. So
Okay.
it's good. All right. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here with us at this Zoom meeting webinar on community solar in Michigan. Our guests will explain what community solar is, and then the legislative action that is happening right now in Lansing regarding community solar. So I want to introduce our guest. We have Julie Roth. Julie Roth is the manager of the energy team at the Department of Sustainability and Innovations of the City of Ann Arbor. Her work focuses on creating and managing programs that facilitate community-wide adoption of solar, building electrification, and energy efficiency. She has been recognized as a Crain's Detroit 2023 Leader in Energy and has received awards from the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association and the Sierra Club for her work on renewables. Our second expert today is John Freeman, who is the executive director of GLREA, which stands for the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association. They educate the public about the benefits of renewable energy and work to enact policies that expand renewable energy in Michigan. He has served 3 terms in the Michigan House of Representatives and has a thorough understanding of the benefits of community solar and the legislative challenges that need to be overcome to make it fully available in Michigan. So welcome, Julie and John and all the participants. And without further ado, as they say, Julie, you'll start, right?
Oh, let's see here. Okay, does that look like what it's supposed to look like?
Yeah,
Okay,
it looks good.
That's great. So this was a fun presentation I put together because it gave me a chance to dive a little deeper into what is community solar, because everyone talks about community solar, and we think we know what it is, but it's a little more nuanced than might meet the eye. So I thought it would be a kind of a useful thing. I only have about 9 slides, so won't go on and on, but I thought it might be useful to dive into exactly what it is and also why this matters. Not just, well, it obviously matters to the planet and why it matters to the city of Ann Arbor and A20 and aligns with what we're doing. So there we go. I think you are all at this point, hopefully, aware of A20, which is the City's Climate Action Plan. And there are 7 overarching strategies, the first of which is powering our city with 100% renewable energy by 2030. So community solar is part of that, and I'm going to kind of dive into what that means. So how do we power our whole city with renewable energy? Basically, you can put it into 3 buckets. You can build solar on site, right? So you can put it on your house, on your church, on your schools. You can put it on the buildings that receive the energy from those solar panels. That's direct solar on site. So in that situation, when you're generating the energy is going right from the solar panels into the building that it serves directly. Those electrons travel into the building. Or it can be a ground mount, right? It can be on the roof or a ground. And all of that solar, if you're doing direct on-site solar, has to feed into a single meter. And this is a DTE regulation. It's not some other technological requirement. DTE says if you're going to put up solar, it must feed 1 meter. This is not a big deal for someone in a single family home, but it gets complicated if you're thinking about any other kind of structure or building that might have more than one meter, right? Which are many, right? You have multifamily homes, you have commercial buildings and things like that, and then it starts getting complicated and unnecessarily complicated. So that's what solar on site is. Then you have community solar, which is off-site. So it's built somewhere not on your building, not serving your individual meter. It's built somewhere else, usually nearby. And the energy, the electrons that it generates go into the grid. They're not traveling directly to your home because electrons don't work like that. They just go wherever they're going to go. And if it's attached to the grid, they go into the grid and they feed whatever's close. But ownership of that solar is whoever is paying for it or bought a few solar panels as part of a community solar project. So maybe I don't have 20 panels on my roof. Maybe I can't afford that. Maybe I don't have a roof that I own. Maybe I decide to buy 4 panels in a community solar project. That's ownership, right? I'm generating that energy. I invested in those panels, and my bill is then reduced by the amount of energy that is producing. The electrons go wherever they're going to go. I'll dive into this a little bit more. But then there's, of course, utility scale solar, right? Like if DTE were to build solar, and they do, this is utility owned. We don't own it. It just feeds the grid. It's good also. All solar is good, but it is generally built in very massive scale, and it feeds the grid. And DTE owns it. It's just part of the generation mix. Just like they own a coal plant and they own a gas plant, they own a solar plant, essentially. So again, rooftop solar, just going a little bit deeper. The way it works is you have a solar panels on your roof or in your yard, and the sun hits those solar panels, they generate electricity. That electricity flows into your house, and it goes into an inverter that changes the direct current or DC energy from the panels into AC or alternating current. Some of you may remember AC/DC. It was a band back when I was like in high school. That's what it refers to. So AC is alternating current. That's what our plugs use. So it feeds the house. But then anything extra, like if it's a beautiful sunny June day, you don't have your air conditioning on, you're not having your lights on, you're just not using a lot of electricity, but your solar is baking the sun, anything extra after servicing your whole house, if there is extra, goes out into the grid. That's called a grid tied system, not an off grid, but then almost all solar arrays in this area are grid tied. So then extra goes out into the grid. It goes to your neighbor, which I love. It goes to like the nearest place. So you're sharing your solar. And then at nighttime, when there is no sun, if you don't have a battery, then you're pulling from the grid, right? So you put excess onto the grid, and at nighttime, you're taking from the grid. So that's sort of how on-site solar works. If you have a battery, you can store some of that excess solar from the day and then use it at night. But essentially, either way, you're generating solar, and either you're using it or your neighbor's using it. And there are benefits to this. There are benefits to on-site solar for sure. Multiple benefits. The climate benefit, because you can do it right now. And if many people do it right now, that has a magnitude of effect. So it addresses the urgency of the need for transition. There's efficiency, because we're not losing any energy, right, from transmission. It's not going anywhere. It's just going right into your house. So there's no loss from long distribution lines. There's resilience, because you pair it with a battery, and the battery acts as a backup generator when the grid goes down. If you don't have a battery with your solar, you also lose power when the grid goes down. Because if you remember that last picture, any excess that's going out into the grid, if the power lines are, if the grid went down, there are going to be line workers up there trying to fix those power lines. And if I'm over generating and feeding back into the grid, then that's going to injure that line worker. So it's a really legitimate reason that we can't have individual solar arrays generating and feeding back into the grid if the grid's down. But if you get a battery, it acts like a generator. except it's not stinky and it's not loud. It's just storing energy that you've produced and then you can use it to break this down. And then, of course, there's the financial benefit of it for those of us who are going to be in our homes for any length of time. The return on investment is really variable. I've seen it anywhere from like really 7 to 13 years. It depends on how much solar you put up, how sunny your roof is, how cheaply you can get it installed, all of these kinds of things. And then after it's done sort of paying for itself, your upfront investment, it just pays you, right? Because your electricity bills are lower. So if you're going to be in your home for more than 10 years, then the next 10 years are just gravy. So there are benefits to on-site solar. And of course, we know, I assume we all know, that DTE's electricity prices just keep going up and up and up and up and up. And that there's just no sign of that slowing or stopping. Along the right of the slide, I won't go over it because it raises my blood pressure, but they almost every year they come back and ask for more very dramatic rate hikes, and they get some portion of that rate hike, and then within weeks they come back and issue another case. And there's another case right now that maybe John can talk about, but it's exhausting. But if you own solar, if you invest in solar, whether it's community solar or on your roof or anywhere, and let's say you can either buy it, but if you're financing it, your cost stays stable. So it actually starts paying itself off faster because your prices don't increase like they do if you're buying from DTE. And our prices in Michigan are really high. It's an equity issue. We have some of the highest electricity prices in the country, the highest in the Midwest, I believe. So I can't answer the why. It's is what it is. But on-site solar has limitations as well. First of all, and most importantly, it's not accessible to everyone. There's a huge equity issue there. If you're a renter, you don't own your roof. So unless your landlord decides to work with you on getting yourself, on a green lease or some sort of way of incentivizing solar, it usually doesn't happen. If you have a building where you're in sort of an apartment in a tall building, right, a vertically stacked building, whatever roof space there is on that building isn't going to be enough roof space to offset all of the electricity of that building. If you have lower income, it requires either you to have some capital or decent credits and enough credit to be able to finance it. Even if you can get the costs down for folks with lower income, you're still going to need some kind of credit to be able to finance that. Or you can have your own home and a shady roof with oak trees all over the place. You don't get any sun, and then that's not good. Or poor roof compatibility of dormers all over your roof, and it just doesn't face the right direction. And then, as some of us were talking about at the beginning, in Michigan, there are restrictions that HOAs, which are homeowners associations, people who live in HOAs. HOAs oftentimes have restrictions on solar, and they don't allow the homeowners, even if the roof is compatible and they own their roof and all that kind of stuff, they don't allow them to have solar. So there's also legislation right now that, and maybe John can talk about if people are interested, that would stop that from happening. So there's limitations to solar. So that's why we're talking about community solar, right? Like the why of this. So in community solar, again, you have this sort of medium-sized installation, usually somewhere, usually in a relatively nearby area, but it doesn't have to be. And the electricity that is generated from those solar panels it feeds into the grid. And the financial benefits, though, go to the people who invest in the solar, and the people who invest in the solar help bring the solar to life, help build the solar, right? So it's just not on my house. And the electrons go wherever they go. And I don't really care, honestly, where the electrons go. Every time we put solar electrons into the grid, we are displacing fossil fuel electrons. So yay, if that's on my house, yay, if that's down the street or in Texas or Detroit or wherever. I'm really happy when we're displacing fossil fuel electrons. So with community solar, you still get the financial benefits of ownership. You can own 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 panels in a community solar array, which means I don't have to have a roof. I don't have to have a whole installation if I can't afford it. I can be a renter, etc. And then if I own some of these panels or I subscribe to them, then immediately on my electricity bill, my bill is lowered by the amount of electricity that those panels generate. So it pays me back. It's not a premium. It's not like I'm paying extra for the benefit of having solar. So this is an equity issue. It is not okay if only homeowners and homeowners with sunny roofs can have on-site solar and all the benefits of that from a financial standpoint. Of course, the benefits of solar to the planet is for everybody, but from a financial standpoint and ownership standpoint. And then this is a little off topic, but I really thought it was worth just touching on. What is utility scale solar? Like, what does this mean for a city like Ann Arbor? So if the city were to get as much solar as we can on the roofs within the city and, work with our sort of legislators and our lobbyists to sort of get community solar legislation passed and develop some community solar projects, we're still likely going to need extra, beyond what we can build in our footprint. So we would go to the utility and we would issue or engage in something called a VPPA, which is a virtual power purchase agreement. Don't worry, no test, no test later. But essentially, these can be fashioned in any sort of way. Some of them can be sort of what they're called low quality, and some of them can be very high quality. And of course, if Ann Arbor goes this route, we would be looking for a high quality VPPA. What does that mean? That means that we can require that this is new builds of renewables that center equity. So we're building them in maybe an area that needs more resilience, or maybe an area that could use the job creation, something like that, or shut down a coal plant in an area like Detroit where there's a lot of emissions. So we would be building new renewables. We'd be centering them in an equity community in a positive way that displace fossil fuels on the grid. Those electrons would not be necessarily coming to Ann Arbor. Right now, when DTE puts renewables on the grid, they just go in the grid. Whatever's closest, they just all flow, right? And it would be the same thing, but we would be building it. And so we would be responsible for the build of that electricity. We wouldn't own it in the same way that community solar or on-site solar allows it to. So I hope that makes some sense, because it's a complicated topic and there's lots of legislative things and things on the ballot you may see, and just different things going on in terms of solar procurement, that I think it's just kind of a helpful primer. So that's all I wanted to say about what it is. And I
have a question.
happy to do questions. Yeah.
You keep using the word displace, that these solar displaces. To me, that sounds like it pushes it out of the way. It's not displacing it. It's adding to it. It's combining with it. It's not saying, I'm going to make it to the other end without you getting in the way.
It's like a race.
You shouldn't be using the word displace. We're not displacing fossil fuel electrons. We're just putting other electrons on the grid.
Well, that's not exactly true either.
I'm sorry, you can go, but I was going to say it's both true. If you put a little bit in, then yes, but at scale, yeah, you put enough solar on the grid and you can shut down a coal plant. That's displacement. That's what we're looking for, is the scale.
That depends on the capacity of the grid, the size of the wires, and the current or the electron flow or amperage or wattage, depending on how you want to measure it.
But
even
I think
the other question I would have is with this Ann Arbor, as it sounds like, is planning on being grid tied, as you used the expression before. Are they planning to have battery backup? Because as you were saying, I know my neighbor who has solar panels on their roof can't use any electricity, either from what they generate on their roof or from the city, when the DTE grid goes down, and you explained why that is. So with DTE's grid going down so often, even having community solar won't help the residents, because if the grid goes down, doesn't matter where the electricities are being generated from, we can't get any electricity, period, unless there is indeed battery backup. Do you know if there's
Robert, you're-
plans for battery backup for this
Yeah.
community solar plan?
So you're right. And we're talking about two slightly different things. One is generation, getting 100% renewables, like getting the energy that is powering our city to be clean. And then you're also talking about resilience, which is equally important and another topic for sure. And we can do a deep dive into resilience, into the sustainable energy utility that we're pitching, and sort of how we're thinking about building resilience and distributing generation around with battery storage. Absolutely 100%. That's equally important. There's so many paths that we need to follow in order to meet our H20 goals, and resilience is not optional. There are people, again, it's an equity issue. There are people for whom having no power can be a life or death situation, not just discomfort. And we're very, very aware of that. And I'd love to come back and talk about resilience of this group if you're ever interested. We actually have an entire resilience staff member who that is what he's working on, is resilience in our community. Sure.
Thank
But
you.
John,
Julie.
you wanted to, yeah. Do you want to jump in, John? You.
No,
I
I'm
think
fine.
Ed,
Oh, okay.
think,
Yeah,
sorry.
thanks.
Ed, yes.
Okay, Julie, two quick questions. For the community solar, can they be based out, if you build a solar field, will the present plans allow that to be built outside of Ann Arbor city limits?
Yeah, present plans, meaning if we get community solar legislation enacted, yeah,
Yep.
it can be anywhere in Michigan.
Okay, and then two, if under the community solar, if I were to subscribe to 10 panels, would the 30% IRA credit be applicable for that?
John, you know the answer?
Yes, absolutely.
Yep, okay, thank you. I'll
And
lower-
just as a little subtle answer to your previous question, that you can locate, since you're in DTE's turf, living in Ann Arbor, the
Mhm.
community solar has to be located within DTE's
Yeah.
territory.
Oh,
Okay.
geez, yeah.
If you currently live in consumers' territory, then the community solar that you would draw power from would have to also be within consumers' energy's territory.
Okay, good.
And that's fair. That's, I presume it's not a sort of a technical need, but if you're gonna get bill credit on your bill, and it's in West Michigan, it's gonna be very difficult to sort of make that happen, correct?
Well, the other reason is more of a practical reason. You want to use the utilities billing system to provide the credits. So since Ed has a bill already from DTE, if he subscribed to community solar for some location in Canton or whatever, then DTE already has Ed's name and address and his utility on the file.
Yeah.
So then it would be a relatively easy technological tweak to be able to credit panels that Ed buys from a community solar back to where through his bill through DTE with his home in Ann Arbor.
John, your faith in DTE's billing system is really touching.
Well, I
Okay.
Well,
No, I
let's
understand.
just for the sake of time, let's stick to questions, and
Yep, okay.
free comments can be maybe saved for the end or something. Thank you, Julie. Thank you for the questions. We'll move on to John with your perspective on what needs to happen in Lansing to make it possible to have community
Also,
solar.
just noting that I did see Alexandra kind of raise her physical hand. I don't know.
Oh,
if You wanted to
I
jump
had
in?
some
I didn't,
questions on
sorry.
the
Thank you.
That's okay. Thanks, Julie. I had some questions on the legislation itself, but John, if you're gonna be talking about that right now, I'll save my questions till you do that. So
Okay.
thanks.
That sounds good. Let me just begin by saying that I thought Julie did an excellent job of her explaining community solar, but I do want to emphasize a couple of points that she made. I want to give it a little more emphasis that this really is a class issue, that community solar is absolutely critical to enable every single person or business, nonprofit, church, any entity to be able to access solar energy. And right now, the statistic is that 50% of all Americans and therefore all Michiganders can't access solar for the reasons that Julie gave. They live in an apartment, they live in a condominium, they live in a house that the roof doesn't face south, or as Julie put it, it's full of oak trees, or that the person doesn't have the upfront money available to be able to pay for the entire system. Because the unique feature of solar is that you need to establish the machinery to be able to capture the sun's rays and then to transition it into electrical energy that is usable. So that requires panels, racking, inverters, as Julie laid out. So if you're on a fixed income, or you live paycheck to paycheck, you just don't have an extra $15,000 lying around in your checking account, then you really is difficult to access solar. And we don't want solar to be only for the well-to-do. We want it to be available to everybody, because solar energy, in fact, will save people money because it costs less to generate. Therefore, the savings can be passed on to the owners. Then secondly, as Julie also stated, that it contributes to a cleaner environment and fights climate change. And we want every single American or Michigan citizen to be able to participate in the change from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And community solar makes that happen. Now, there's absolutely nothing that's currently preventing the utilities from doing community solar. And in fact, some utilities are doing very modest community solar projects in Michigan. Cherryland Electric, which is a rural electric co-op around the Traverse City, they have a relatively small community solar operation that's available to people that are within Cherryland's distribution network. The city of Layence, it's L'Anse, I think it's French. It's a small little city in the Upper Peninsula. They have a municipal utility, very small. They're offering community solar to the citizens of Layence. And so there currently are examples. But the reality, though, is that DTE and consumers do not support community solar. And they are fighting, I'm speaking to all of you, but particularly to Alexandra, they are fighting tooth and nail to oppose the enactment of community solar, because they want to maintain their corporate business model of being a monopoly on the generation and distribution of energy. Their business model has been in place for about 100 years. It's worked pretty well for them for 110 years. But then 10 years ago, when the cost of solar dramatically decreased as a result of demand for it, which as a result of public policies put in place at the federal and state government, the cost of solar has come down dramatically. And therefore, the savings can be passed on to people that are able to purchase. But it's community solar is key, because we want to help working class and middle income people be able to work their way up through their bootstraps, generate some wealth to improve their family finances. And the cost of energy is one of the highest components of a person's household expenses. I think the statistic is that anything above 20% means that you're spending a greater proportion on energy than you ought to be. And so that's why community solar is important. And so going back to Alexandra's comment, is that Michigan has to do what, frankly, 23 other states around the country have done, is that they have enacted a community solar policy into law, which requires, and I say requires, it's not an option. It requires the utilities, in this case, under the regulation of the Michigan Public Service Commission, which frankly includes all the investor-owned utilities, DTE, Consumers, Indiana Michigan Power, Upper Peninsula Power Company, all the big ones. It requires them to work with third-party developers who want to design and build community solar projects. And then the utility must work with the developer to utilize the utility's billing system, as Julie pointed out, to be able to credit back to the person's home the amount of energy that the panels they either purchase, and they can use the investment tax credit by 30%, just as if those panels were on your roof, or the other community solar model, as Julie alluded to, is a subscriber model, where frankly you subscribe to a certain number of panels, but those folks that subscribe to those panels will not be able to use the investor tax credit. In some cases, and this is a little bit of a tangent, the third-party developer raises capital to build the community solar project by being able to offer the investor tax credit to investors who may want to reduce their tax liability for other reasons, as well as make money by investing into the community solar project. And so that is why it is very important to enact legislation in Michigan. And we've been working on this for several years. This cycle, we're particularly optimistic, though by no means is it a slam dunk. That there are bills in the Michigan House by Rachel Hood in Grand Rapids, a Democrat, and then in the Senate, yours very truly, Jeff Irwin, he has one of the bills, Senate Bill 153, and then Ed McBroom, the Republican from the Upper Peninsula, has the other bill, which is Senate Bill 152. Now, they are tie-barred together, and that's TIE-BARRED. This is a legislative tactic where both bills have to be enacted in order for the law to take effect. What typically happens is that a legislator has an idea, but they want to try and build political support for it, in most cases by reaching out to the other political party, which is exactly what these two bills are. You've got Jeff Irwin, a progressive Democrat from Ann Arbor. You've got Ed McBroom, a conservative Republican from the Upper Peninsula. But Ed McBroom is very supportive because, as Julie said, not only does Michigan have the highest electrical rates in the upper Midwest, folks in the UP, they're paying close to 30 cents per kilowatt hour, probably a good 10 cents more per hour than folks in DTE land and Consumers land are paying. So as you probably realize, people in the Upper Peninsula are working class, middle income at best, and they have to struggle with the elements. So they really struggle with high cost of energy. And that's why Ed McBroom is all for it, because he wants to make the option available to everybody in the UP, businesses, churches, nonprofits, individuals, you name it, people in apartments, people in condos, the kit and caboodle, to be able to have an alternative than having to buy, in his case, energy from the Upper Peninsula Power Company. So what can people do? GLREA, we have a legislative contact system called Do-Gooder, where we are asking our members to send emails to the state senators to encourage them to support the bill, number one, but also to encourage the chair of the Senate Energy Committee, which is a gentleman named Sean McCann, and he's from Kalamazoo. He's the Democratic chair of the Senate Energy and Environment Committee. We want him to hold a hearing because there are many different ways of killing legislation. And so the first step in legislation is it gets assigned to a committee, in this case, the Senate Energy Committee, because they have jurisdiction over energy bills. And then the Senate, if the committee takes up the bill, or in this case, both bills, then they will examine the bills, hold testimony. And, the members on the committee, both Democrats and Republicans, can ask questions and maybe even in some cases seek amendments. And then if the bill comes out of the Senate Energy Committee, goes to the Senate floor, where they'll take a vote. And if it passes the Senate, then it goes over to the House, or it'll be assigned to the House Energy Committee. And the same process goes. And so the bills have to come out of the House Energy Committee, go to the House floor for a vote. And if both the House and Senate pass the bills, but the bills are slightly different, then they have to go to a conference committee, which will consist of people from both the Senate and the House, and they will examine both bills, the one that passed the Senate, the one that passed the House, and then they'll try and work a compromise to come up with one proposal. And then that bill then goes back to the House and Senate for a final vote. And then if it does pass the House and Senate, then it'll go to the governor for her signature. So right now we're at the very first stage of the process. Our goal, and the legislature is going to break at the end of June. So our goal is to hopefully have the Senate Energy Committee hold a hearing on the bill to kind of figure out who is for and who's against it, and figure out the questions and whether we need to do any tweaks. I'm going to stop with one final comment. Last November, a whole series of bills were enacted by the House and the Senate, and Julie kind of mentioned a couple of them. And they passed on a partisan basis. Originally, the community solar was a part of the main bill, but that was the one demand that utilities made to Sean McCann, Winnie Brinks, who is the Senate Majority Leader, and Sam Singh, who is another senator who is the Senate Floor Leader. He's kind of like the captain of the floor in terms of moving bills around and all that. They wanted to, at the very least, neutralize the utility opposition. And the one demand that utilities made that they were not going to back off from was the community solar. So it got taken out of the package of bills. And we were obviously disappointed by this, but there was enough good stuff in the rest of the package that made it acceptable, particularly from my point of view, which is, social change can happen in sudden leaps, or it can happen incrementally over time. And in this case, we got enough good stuff passed by all the other bills that made it worthwhile to support the package, even if community solar was pulled out. But that doesn't negate our commitment to moving community solar for all the reasons we gave you. And this is really what it really comes down to, is that we need to build political support from the public, from the business community, from farmers, from places of worship, from conservatives, from hunters and fisher people that want a clean environment and they want lower costing energy. Because the other reality of community solar is that it's an economic development tool. Because every time more people can save on their energy bills, that means those families have more money available to provide for their families, send their kids to college, whatever. If businesses can save on their energy expenditures, that means they have more money available to invest in their business, and which will only help the state of Michigan, because that means they can hire more people because their overhead is lesser. So this is, for any number of reasons, very smart public policy. The problem is, and I'll finish on this note, is that the utilities are fighting a rear guard action where they're trying to maintain their business model. They're trying to make it as difficult as possible for people to shift from utility energy, which, as Julie said, is the highest in the Midwest, and it is. And the other way that utilities are fighting this is that they play dirty politics by spending a lot of political action committee money to try and buy off votes from state legislators. I can tell you right now, Jeff Irwin cannot be bought off by the utilities, and neither can Ed McBroom. So I tip my hat to those two. You've got a terrific state senator in your district. You should be very proud of them. And frankly, I have tremendous respect for them. So I'll stop there and take any questions.
Okay. Hey, John, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. That's amazing. Really clear laying out the process and what's going on. Could you put a link in the chat maybe to go to your website to be able to send the emails both to, you said, to the head of the Senate Energy Committee to schedule
All you have
a
to
hearing?
do, yeah, all you have to
Uh-huh.
do is just www.glraa.org and look up on the upper right corner of, I think it says it's, what does it say? Contact or something?
Let's see.
Yeah, upper right
Just
corner.
a second.
There is I got it. I can move this over and look on my.
Take action. It's take
Yeah,
action.
take action. Exactly. Just click on that and that will
Mhm.
automatically take you to the Renewable Energy for Michigan do-gooder software. And all you have to do is type in your address and your state senator will pop up immediately. And for most of you, it's probably going to be Jeff Irwin. But that's fine. Let Jeff know that you back him and you support him. And that's very important.
I put it in the chat. I put the link in the chat.
Perfect.
Excellent. Thank you. And one other question before other questions is June the deadline?
No,
When
no.
When is the deadline? The end of
The
the
deadline
year?
is going to be December 31st.
Yeah.
Because the way
Yeah.
it works is that everything operates on a 2-year cycle. It's based upon the House of Representatives. They have an election every 2 years. So
Yeah.
the conventional thinking is that it will be, if we have a shot at this, it will take place in the fall, but it might in fact take place during the lame duck. And what lame duck is after the elections, we will know what the composition will be of the next legislative session, which takes effect January 1st. So for instance, right now the Democrats control the House and they control the Senate. The Senate's not up for an election. The governor is not up for an election. What's up for an election is the House. We only control the House by 2 votes. So hypothetically speaking, if we lose the House, then it's going to be much more difficult to pass legislation in January. So the Democrats will have a 4 or 5 weeks. They can decide how long they want lame duck to go for, but they can have after the election until the end of the year, they will still control the House and the Senate by the same current majority. So they can pass anything they want to pass. And even though the Republicans will take control in the House in January under this kind of hypothetical, they wouldn't be able to stop anything. And so that is pretty standard strategy that's used for forever in this country when you have an election on the second Tuesday of November, and then depending upon what happens. Now, if the Democrats retain control of the House, then, we may take it up in the fall or they may take it up again in January. But if it takes up in January, then you got to start the process all over again.
Yeah.
Jeff Irwin would have to introduce the new bill. Ed McBroom would have to introduce the new bill, and the process starts over.
Thank you, John. Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the background. And I have a few questions about the legislation. I haven't read the bills yet. I probably should, and I think I will at some point soon. And just as background, I'm an energy law professor at the law school at the university. And I also just moved to Ann Arbor last year to take that job from the University of Minnesota. So I've lived in Minnesota for
Minnesota
many decades.
rocks.
Yes, indeed. So Minnesota's had community solar for over 10 years now. So I guess I'm gonna just ask all my questions. There's several of them, and answer them in whatever order you want. One is, are you trying to model, is there an effort to model the legislation after Minnesota's law or one of the other states that's out there? So that's one question. And then also the size of the projects, is community solar defined in the legislation? I think in Minnesota it might be between 1 and 5 megawatts. Is that kind of the target that you're trying for? There was a question before about geographic restrictions, and I think you'd said certainly it has to be within the utilities territory, but the Minnesota law also had earlier had for quite a few years had restrictions that you could only subscribe if the project was in your county or the neighboring county, which actually excluded most of Minneapolis and St. Paul because you needed enough land to build a project of that size. They've now kind of reduced those subscriptions. So and maybe in Ann Arbor, it's not that big a deal because there is more available land. It's not as densely populated, but I'm wondering if there's any restrictions that would would limit the ability of Ann Arbor residents to subscribe. Another question is about pricing. So Minnesota has a value of solar tariff to set the pricing that the Public Utilities Commission sets. Is there a similar mechanism in the law for the PSC in Michigan to set the pricing, and sort of how much do you trust them to do a good job of that? And then I guess the last question I'll ask is are there any set-asides for low-income subscribers? That's something that Minnesota added just recently this last year, but didn't originally have, because obviously the goal is to allow more lower-income residents to be able to take advantage of solar. And if you don't either, sort of have either set-asides or financial assistance for that to happen, typically, the subscribers tend to be commercial, industrial, and then more well-off residential homeowners. So sorry for all the questions, but I'm excited that Michigan is considering this, and I think it's going to be a heavy lift to pass because, as you said, utilities. There's nothing good in this for investor-owned utilities. So even though a lot of the other clean energy legislation, there's a lot they can get behind. There's a lot they can make money off of. Not true with community solar. So it is a heavy lift. So
let me ask you a question.
Here.
Are you just teaching, or are you also practicing on the side?
I'm not. I'm a full-time tenured faculty member. I mean, I do some, pro bono work and consulting, but
I want
little.
you to, do you know a woman named Sarah Mills?
Yeah, I actually just was in DC at a conference with her. I know Sarah really well.
You should talk to her, because I think you have enough interesting questions that you need to get out of strictly the theoretical realm of teaching in law school, which is great. Don't get me wrong. But Sarah does the academic work, but she's also out in the field. And she is revered around the state because she is able to do some really important theoretical work, but she's also out in the field, so she puts a lot what she does in practice. And you obviously know a lot about Minnesota that I would encourage you to think about sharing your experiences with people like, well, myself, but there's a lot of us that are always looking for other smart people that can be a part of the coalition. So let me just answer the questions, and let me try and do it in reverse order. You should, first of all, download the two bills. They're really short. Senate Bill 152 is a whopping 3 pages. Senate Bill 153 is a whopping 7 pages. In Senate Bill 152, there is a 30% set aside for low-income people. It's in section 235 1C. You can see that. Whether the bills are based only upon Minnesota, I don't know. I don't know if they're only based upon Minnesota, but
probably not.
I always cite Minnesota, though, as an example in the upper Midwest of a state that has embraced community solar and has installed lots of projects and lots of very creative projects. I mean, there are, as Julie pointed out, there are different types of community solar, but there's some community solar that are exclusively targeted to low-income people. And there are others that are more targeted to more of a general audience. And so Minnesota, we used a lot because they seem to have done, there are different types of developers that have different goals in mind when they devise the community solar projects. And because Minnesota has the state law, you all can access a ton of federal dollars because Joe Biden and Jennifer Granholm, they are emphasizing community solar as a national energy policy. And the problem is, and there is a federal grant called Solar for All, which was initially designed for community solar exclusively, but they had to amend it somewhat because of states like Michigan, which we don't have community solar per se. And so we're able to get 156 million to do other kinds of stuff that is not truly community solar, but is still going to be targeted to for low and moderate income people. So I don't know exactly about whether it's targeted on Minnesota exclusively or not, but certainly it's part of it. In terms of the projects, I quickly looked through the bills and I didn't see any indication that it has to be a certain size, or if the size is too much for the law. A lot of the implementation is going to be done by the Michigan Public Service Commission. So anytime there's legislation that doesn't have particularly good details, then the Michigan Public Service Commission will go through a stakeholder process, which is another reason why you ought to think about getting involved, because that's another process which is open for anybody that wants to participate. Now, the last point you raised, I don't want to say it's the most interesting, but is a frustration on my part, because 2 years ago, this is on the value of solar. There is an organization called the Utility Consumer Participation Board, which is a source of public funding that organizations can get who represent residential people. When you get involved with a rate case in front of the Michigan Public Service Commission, you're going up against DTE and consumers. They, as you can imagine, have a ton of resources. They spare no expense, expert witnesses, staff, attorneys, etc. People representing residential have nothing. And so the state of Michigan years ago created this Utility Consumer Participation Board, which allocates about $1 million, 900,000 prior to the November law. They upped the money. But organizations like ours would apply for these funds to hire expert witnesses. 2 years ago, we applied for a grant, and we did it in coalition with Vote Solar and with a couple other groups. We retained, and the whole purpose of our grant was to make an argument that we wanted the state of Michigan, through the Public Service Commission, do a formalized value of solar study exactly like Minnesota did. And we actually retained an expert witness who is from the University of Minnesota. I forget his name. It's kind of a funny name, but he was extremely sharp guy, and he was excellent in terms of making our case, helping us make our case. We made it to the Public Service Commission, the case, in a formalized setting. They half-assed agreed to it. They hired a firm to do the value of solar study, but it really wasn't truly a value of solar study. This is extremely frustrating. And for those of you that may be wondering, why am I spending so much time on this, is because there's a running debate about what is the value of the extra solar electricity that gets shipped back to the grid that the utilities can then use at their discretion. Right now, under the current law, if you send extra kilowatts of electricity, just like Julie said in June, and your AC is off, you get approximately 50% of the retail rate back as a credit on your bill that then you can tap into when the sun doesn't shine in November, December, January, whatever. But the utilities, they get this energy, they give me 50% of what the value is, then they turn right around and sell that energy to Alexandra's neighbor and charge them full retail rate. We think that's a bloomin' ripoff, because the utility didn't pay for the machinery. Alexandra paid for it, assuming she's got solar on her roof. And so then the other benefit to DTE by having access to this solar is that then they don't have to bring on peaker power plants when the air conditioning is on and there's a lot of demand for electricity. If they have access to all this extra solar energy, then they don't have to bring on these peaker plants, which are only brought on in emergencies. So they tend to be the most expensive and dirtiest of the plants. This saves the utilities a lot of money, but we argue that the owner of the solar that exported electricity back to the grid is not getting the full value of the energy they exported back to the grid. So if we did a full formalized value of solar study like Minnesota did, where they take into consideration all these various factors, then we can truly come up with appropriate value, which is considerably more than 50% of the retail rate, which is what the distribution tariff currently is in Michigan. So we are continuing to try to get the value of solar study. We have failed miserably up until now. And so we'll probably keep pushing, but like anything else, we keep getting little wins here and there. We got a lot of wins last November. And if you want, I can go into that, but I don't want to take up too much more time.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you, Julie. We are exactly at 8:30. That's the time we allocated for this. If there are any other pressing questions and our experts are willing to stay longer, I guess that it's possible, but this is the official end. Let me just check. Do people have any burning questions? Looks like we're good.
Eli,
So I just
this was excellent, Eli. Thank you for doing it.
Yeah, thanks for
thank you.
setting this up. This was great.
Thank you very much for everybody who joined. And
Can I make
big
one
thank
final
you.
comment? I
Yes,
just
please,
want
John.
you all to know that you have a real treasure in Julie Roth. She is so excellent at what she does. She and Missy Stoltz are like a dynamic duel in the state of Michigan. And we all look to Julie as well as Missy as inspiration for the work we all do. So
Oh,
worship
John.
the
Yes.
ground she walks on.
Oh, jeez. Don't do that.
And we do, Julie.
And great thank you to the Diana Circle. I think the last time I was with you all was in person at some beautiful farm where you were doing
Of course, at the
yeah,
Green
you were doing
Things
about
Farm
food.
on
Yeah,
Nixon
it
Road.
was absolutely
That-
gorgeous, and I
that-
so
that-
appreciate your community and all of you, and for diving into these topics and doing the work. I mean, yeah, you guys are the heroes. So thank you.
Well, thank you. There are guests here from other congregations or organizations. So thank you for everybody who came. And thank you. That was very informative and encouraging. And I hope people will click on that link to send the email to the legislator. And then if you want, look at the two bills. So
And
thank you,
become
John
members of
and Julie.
GLREA. We're a membership-based organization, and at the top of the homepage, there's something that says membership. Just click on membership. Dues are just $30 a year, and they're tax deductible. So we'd love to have you all join our movement.
That's great. That's great. And every Thursday you have the webinar.
Generally, we don't have one tomorrow because generally tomorrow is Detroit Solar Stories, but the speaker had to bail for some unknown reason. So, but Julie is a member, so she gets all the notices.
Actually,
Thank
I
you
think
very much.
I'm on to present in June on
There
the
you
new
go.
home energy advisor. So yeah.
Cool.
Thank you
Well,
all. Thank you so
a round of applause or the Zoom applause to our specialists, to our guests, and everybody. Thank you. Have a good
Bye-bye
night.
now.
Bye all.
Bye bye. Bye bye.